take a look at how to use Clonezilla in VirtualBox. The process is not that complicated when you know what to do, but it's not the most user-friendly interface, so it can definitely be confusing if you're not that familiar with the technology that it's using. So the first thing is you'll need the ISO of Clonezilla. If you're here on CTP's network, you can copy this from student storage, the student NAS. If you don't, though, you can download it from the Clonezilla website, easy to Google. So we're going to show both creating an image and then restoring the image. First part of creating the image, we need to figure out, well, where are we going to store this image? And generally with imaging, you're going to be storing something on a network storage location. So knowing where you're going to store it, what technology it's going to use to connect is really important for accomplishing this task. So before you start up the installer, I'd really make sure that you have that information ready first. In a virtual machine, we need to make sure that our networking is set up correctly so that it can connect to that network resource where we're going to store our image. And then we're going to basically boot from this ISO in our virtual machine and go through the image creation process. I'll show you all those steps. Restoring, basically the same thing. We have to know, well, where is the destination? Where did this image go to? Is our virtual machine on the right network to access that? Boot the ISO and then go through the restore process. Looks very similar both ways. So first thing, let's go take a look at VirtualBox. And what I have here is a virtual machine that has Windows installed already. And I'm going to create this image from this virtual machine. And then I have a brand new virtual machine that I created. There's actually nothing on this. I just created the initial settings so that it matches the same number of cores, same RAM, same quantity of storage. So it's the same settings for the virtual machine, there's just nothing installed yet. Okay, so we've got that. We're going to get our destination details. I always work from a notepad that I have open when I'm doing my work. And my NAS is located at a private IP address on the CTP network, 10.0.190.1. Its network name is FreeNAS. It's based on the FreeNAS software, very creative. And then inside of FreeNAS, we are going to be using this location. Now, I figured this out by actually opening up File Explorer and going to the network, opening FreeNAS, and then finding the location of where I wanted to store my file. And this is the location. It's FreeNAS in Student Storage folder and the Alex folder. And if I click up here in the location bar, I can actually just copy and paste. So that's the network-based location, and that is the path to where I want to store my image. You can see I already have one here. We tested this process earlier. Okay, great. So I've collected my destination details. Now I want to make sure that the networking details are correct on my virtual machine. Head on over, take a look at settings, network, and what I want is bridged adapter because I want my virtual machine to be on the same network as the whole CTP network. If it's set to NAT, it's going to be assigned an IP address that's behind NAT, sort of like being behind a router. And so I won't necessarily be able to access CTP's network in this network location. So bridged is definitely what you want here, at least in our scenario. That's all good. All right, next thing, mount the ISO as in virtual optical disk and boot from it. All right, so a couple ways to get in there. We can go into settings, but you can also just find your storage here and select it here. time I selected it this way, it didn't boot, so we'll see what happens this time. May or may not work. But you can see optical drive, Clonezilla, that's my ISO. Network adapter shows right here. It's bridged, so it's going to be on CTP's network. That looks all good. Well, the last thing I want to look at, though, is the boot order. It's going to be here in System, and it's showing that it's going to try to boot from this optical before the hard disk. I want it to boot to Clonezilla and not Windows, so that should be correct. All right, let's start it up. Okay, we've got a couple different options for starting it, but this default top option is probably the one that will work just fine for you. Some of these other options will help you avoid certain kinds of problems, but generally the default will work. And that's what I got last time I selected the optical disk this way. All right, so let's just close it down. I'm going to go into Settings, Storage. I'm just going to remove it. I'm going to choose. I'm going to add, just in case I got the wrong file selected somehow. Okay, Clonezilla. Looks good. Let's try again. All right, it's going to work this time, I believe. There's a bit of a pause before it starts showing you the boot sequence. Great. And here we are at the results of booting that ISO. So, okay, English, that's what I'm using. I'll select that. Default keyboard, US keyboard, that's all good. Just hitting enter to select these. Start Clonezilla, sounds good. And now we have to tell it basically, well, what are we using Clonezilla for? And in this case, of course, we want to be working with images here, so we want this first option. Now it's asking basically, well, what remote storage location are you going to use for working with these images? And in our case, we're going to use Samba server. If you don't know what that is, you should Google it. Samba is the Linux-based software that makes SMB or Windows networking function, and that's how our remote storage is set up. There are a few other options here which are possible depending on what you're doing, but this is a pretty common and pretty easy setup. So I'll select Samba server. Now it's asking, well, where is this server? And I'm going to type in the IP address since I know that. This is why we needed to be on CTP's network so that we could access this device. It's asking about the domain for the Samba server. Well, we don't have a domain, so we're just going to hit enter here. And now, what are the credentials for accessing this remote storage? In this case, our username is image, so I'll type that in. And now it's basically saying, where do you want to store these images or read them from? What's that file path once we're inside of this network storage location? And that's that path that we have on our notepad here. So let's just refresh our memory. Okay, so it's suggesting that we're putting it in a location called images, but actually we're going to be storing it in the student storage folder and then inside a folder called Alex. And the other thing to notice is that in Windows, the delimiter here in the file path is the \/ character. And here in Clonezilla, it's using the /. So they work the same way, we just need to convert them. So it's going to be /student storage /Alex. I'll just type it here just so that we can see what we intend to do. It's going to look like that in Clonezilla. All right, let's head back over here. Student storage /Alex. Okay. Now it's asking, well, what protocol does this remote storage use? And in our case, we're using, or it will function with 3.0. So that's what we recommend that you select. Different servers can be configured in different ways. So you may have to try different protocols to see what actually is working if you don't know. Some of these may work, some of them may not. So it could unfortunately be a bit of trial and error if you don't know how your remote device is configured. Okay. And it's asking, well, something about security here. We're just going to use the default mode. Again, if you knew how your remote device was set up and you needed this other setting, well, you may need to change this. But in this case, the system default works just fine. Okay, now it's just warning us, hey, you're going to have to type in the password for the image user at this remote resource and location. So when I hit enter, it's going to open up the command prompt for me. I'll type in my password, hit enter, and now it's showing me a little bit of information about the connection that I made. And if I typed in the wrong password, or I didn't have access to this, that there's something wrong with the path, then I'd probably get some type of an error message. You may see file system type is CIFS. That's what this SMB protocol uses, I believe, to access these files remotely. That all looks good. I'm going to just hit enter. All right, so now it's asking, well, what mode do you want to run Clonezilla in? Well, beginner is complex enough. If it doesn't have all the options that you need, then expert may be something you'll have to explore and see what it's got to offer you. Beginner is probably going to work for you in almost all cases. And now it's asking, well, great, what do you want to do? And what we want to do is we want to save an entire disk as an image. There's an option here for our saving partitions and a whole bunch of different, there's a restore because I've already actually created an image. If you haven't created an image yet, you won't have these restore options. All right, so we want to save disk. That's the creation process. It's asking us, well, all right, let's give it a name so that we can recognize it later on. And by default, it's going to give us the date. That's good enough for me, so I'll hit enter. It's asking now, well, what is it that you want to create an image from? What's the source? We set up the destination. It's this network-based location. There's a path to it, username and password, the protocol, all these different things. That's all good. And now it's saying, well, what do you want to create this image from? And generally, this is going to be very simple for our virtual machine like this, because there's just going to be a single storage device. So we're all good here. We're just going to select this default. All right, and it's asking about what type of compression. I don't know the particular differences between these two options. Either of them will work perfectly fine. And here we can check the file system before we create this image. It warns you it's only really going to work with certain file systems. So in fact, it says right there, not for NTFS. NTFS is what Windows uses, so this is not an option that you should even use. And here, do you want to check the saved image to make sure that it worked correctly? you can do this. It's probably a good idea for an image that you're creating that's important to you. Just for this test case, I'm just going to say no because it's going to save a little bit of time in this process. And then finally, do we want to encrypt it? We're not dealing with anything that's secure here. We're just on our own doing a little test project on our own network, so no reason to encrypt. And then it's asking, well, great, after it's done, well, what do you want me to do? And we've got a couple of options. We can have it ask us, or we can have it reboot or shut down. After I create the image, I'm not going to do anything with this virtual machine, so I'm just going to tell it I'm going to have it shut down. Okay, so now it's giving me the whole command that it's going to actually use to process this. So in theory, you could copy this command for some future use out of the command line. I'm going to hit enter to continue. Getting the process set up now. And here it's saying basically, all right, are you sure this is what you want to do? I'm going to say yes. And then it's going to launch into the image creation process. I'm going to sit here watching progress bars for a little while. This took about 5 minutes last time. We'll see how long it takes. All right, great. Quite a fast process this time. I guess our network's a little less busy, perhaps. And I believe it's going to shut down the machine now. It'll happen automatically. You can just hit enter to speed it up. Okay, great. So we just created the image here in the Windows virtual machine that had Windows installed. Now, next part of the process, we'll start in just a moment, is setting up, restoring that image to this empty virtual machine. So let's take a look at restoring the image now. We went through the process of creating it, and now we want to restore it back. We're going to use a brand new virtual machine. So first thing, same, we want to check the destination details. Where did the image get stored? Where we're going to restore it from. Again, I have that in my notepad here. I have the IP address, the network name, the path on that storage device, and actually I have it typed in both ways with the backslash and the / delimiter. Windows prefers the backslash, and Clonezilla is using the /, so we're going to have to type it in with the way Clonezilla likes it. That's all good. Let's check our networking details on the virtual machine and make sure that ISO is ready to be booted in it. Heading over to VirtualBox. So here is the virtual machine that I created the image from, and here's the one that I'm going to put the image onto. You can see over here that the network is set up, bridged. It's because I need it to be on CTP's network so I can access the network resource where the image was stored. For the optical drive here, let me open up settings, go to storage, my optical disk. This first option seems to work more reliably than these others. I don't know why that is, but if you use this, it seems to work best. And I've already used the Add button to select my ISOs that I commonly use in these labs. Got Clonezilla selected now. Okay, that's there. Optical disk. Check the storage. Optical disk is in the boot order before the hard drive, so that should work. So we're all good. We know where this image is coming from. We have networking set up. We have our optical disk ready to go. start it up. Okay, booted right to optical disk. I'll make the screen a little bit larger. Don't check this, don't show this message again, because if you get stuck in the console and you can't figure out how to adjust things, it's a little frustrating. So this always just reminds me of what the keyboard commands are to get back to a more standard window or break the keyboard mouse out of its right control. Okay, great. So here I am using English. I'm using a US keyboard, so these defaults are good. The beginning part of this process, exactly the same as when we created the image. I'm going to start Clonezilla, and we're going to be working with images here. Device image. Same option. And then once again, we're going to choose our Samba server since we're accessing this using SMB across our network. Same option as the image creation. Okay, I'm going to tell it where to go look. This is the IP address of that student NAS, or whatever storage device you happen to be using. No domain, I'll just hit enter here. Username for that remote storage is image. And here's where we have to type in the path on that remote storage device. Just refresh my memory here, /student storage /Alex. Okay, that looks good. And again, you need to know which protocol potentially your remote service is using. In this case, we're using 3.0. If you don't know, then, well, you can try them until you find what works. I guess it suggests here that 1.0 is the thing to try first. Okay. We're going to use the default here for the security mode. We're not using different password hashing or anything like that. And now it's asking us to enter in our password for this image account on this remote storage device. Type it in its command line, hit enter. It confirms by showing me some details about that remote storage, so that's all good. We want beginner mode. All right. Advanced, I'm scared of it. And here we want to restore the disk. Last time we chose this save disk option. Now, well, of course, the reverse will be the restore. We want to restore an image to a local disk. Sounds good. And now it's asking, well, what image on this remote storage do you want to restore? Now, I did a test earlier on, that test image, and then the one that I just completed is this dated one. And I'll choose that first option. If nothing shows up there, then you probably didn't create the image yet, or you didn't store it where you thought that you did. And this is the destination. We're going to be taking that remote image and putting it onto a storage device in our virtual machine. It's only got one storage device, so this is a pretty easy option. Do we want to check the image before restoring? This could be a good idea if it's something important. In this case, I just would like to save a little bit of time, so I'll choose no. And then it's basically asking, well, after I'm done with this process, what do you want me to do? And in this case, I want to reboot to my virtual machine and make sure that the process really worked. So I'll choose reboot here, but the choice is yours. Okay, now it's giving me a summary of the command it's going to run. I hit enter. All right, it's got itself ready, and now it's basically making sure. Are you sure you want to do this? Oh, and it's really want to make sure, because any data on this disk is going to be wiped out. When you reimage a storage device, anything that was on it is going to be wiped out. So it's potentially a loss of data, so it's just really being paranoid. Are you sure that you want to do this? Let me ask you again. I like how it puts it. I'll say yes. It's going to get everything set up, and then the process should start. All right, great. Pretty quick. And if it restarts, it may restart to the Clonezilla ISO since that's mounted, but let's see what happens. Oh yeah, it even tells us, please remove it. And we're just going to close the window because send this shutdown signal. Oh, we can't do that here. Let's let it shut down gracefully here. Okay. And I wanted to do that because I want to remove this optical. Oh, look, it already did for me. So I don't even need to do anything. Just let it restart here. And if all went well, yep, Windows logo, and it'll boot to the login prompt. Just log in to make sure it seems to have really worked. And we're at the Windows desktop. So that whole process of creating the image and then restoring it to a new virtual machine worked. All good. That's what you need to use the Clonezilla tool to create an image and then restore it. So a few different options there, but the options I use are, I think, the most likely to be used, and at CTP, the ones we'll use most frequently. Hope that was helpful, and see you next time.